Alright, so for today's episode, I'm going to be talking about Wyoming hunt planning. This is going to be part one of a two-part episode. So this first part is going to be talking a lot about the different states I looked at and why I chose Wyoming, whether it was season dates or points based. And then I'm going to look at how many preference points it takes to draw different areas in Wyoming. Then I'm going to go over the difference between regions and the different numbered areas in Wyoming, and then look at the quotas for each of those and the overall population in Wyoming and that sort of thing. So this is going to be kind of the paperwork aspects of the Wyoming hunt planning and going over all the point options and the different technical things before the actual hunt started. So this is going to be part one of the hunt planning in Wyoming. And then after this episode is going to be released, there's going to be part two that's going to be more focused on the logistics of the hunt and then the hunt itself and the different areas I looked at when I was hunting on the ground. So this is part one of this Wyoming hunt planning series, and enjoy. Alright, so the first thing we're going to look at when we're going through this dissection of why I chose Wyoming and then how I plan my hunt in Wyoming is I'm going to return to one of the graphics I used in a previous episode, but we're going to look at it in a little bit different of a way than we have before. So what I'm going to do when I'm kind of first explaining this is I'm going to go over the reasons why I ended up choosing Wyoming and why I didn't run with a lot of the other states. So the reason I chose to start with this graphic that we used before is it shows tag availability, which was obviously my main concern when I was planning this hunt, is where can I actually get a tag. So a couple of the main options that would stick out is Washington would seem to stick out because it has that over-the-counter rifle like we talked about before. Idaho would seem to stick out. Maybe Nebraska would stick out, and then some of the other states that have leftover tags or easy to draw tags like Colorado or Utah, or obviously Wyoming stuck out too, or some of these other states did stick out. The reason I didn't go with Idaho was I knew I needed a season that would run into the first week of November. Reason for that is the individual that I was party applying with was limited to doing a November season, so I knew I wanted something that had a November season. So that kind of that's what nixed Idaho off of it. And in that same with that same criteria, it nixed Washington off of it too. So right there, right off the bat, those two states were off limits because they didn't run November rifle seasons. Then Montana actually could have been an option, but the draw wasn't 100% certain for their November season. I think as a non-resident, my first year applying with 0 points, it was somewhere 50 to 70%. So that's the reason Montana wasn't on. Colorado has November seasons, but I was building up points in Colorado to later on apply for a higher value, a higher sought-after hunt. So I didn't want to burn all my Colorado points on a lesser November season. So Colorado was off limits. Utah didn't have any November seasons that I was looking for. I couldn't draw anything with 0 points. California was off. Nebraska was off. So after I started nixing all these things, what I noticed was there was an area in Wyoming that could be obtained with 0 points that had November seasons in part of that region for that tag, and then October seasons in a different part of the region for that tag. So that was the main reason I actually got drawn to Wyoming, was it had the season dates that everyone in the party that I was applying with could make work. So that's why I actually ended up settling on Wyoming. It was entirely season dates related. Coincidentally, that unit that I was looking at had decent, actually above average, I would say, public land access. So it had the access, it had very open terrain. There wasn't a lot of deer throughout the unit, but the terrain was very open, and it did seem like enough people were having success on the public land there. So not only was I able to acquire the tag there that I wanted, but the terrain was terrain that I was open to hunting. There was good public access and decent habitat there. So that's kind of why I ended up going into Wyoming. And so for these next graphics, we're gonna keep zooming in. We're gonna zoom in on the state of Wyoming, and then we'll look at the different options there and talk about the preference points, and then we're gonna zoom in on the region I decided. So let's switch to the next graphic. Alright, so here we have our map of Wyoming. So what I've done for you guys is I went on their website, I found the rough boundaries for all their different regions. These are their regions. So what Wyoming does is they list their regions by a letter and then the individual units within that region get a number. And I'm going to go over the difference between regions and units in the next portion, in the kind of final portion of this planning episode. But for now, we're going to talk about the regions. So they have all these regions in Wyoming, and each region has a preference point draw for non-residents. So the number I have associated here with each region is how many preference points it takes in that draw to be 100% certain that you're going to draw that tag. A lot of these regions, like A and B, and I think even some of these other ones in here, even though it takes 1 point, a preference point already had, to be 100% in the draw, a lot of these ones are somewhere like 75%, 80% with 0 preference points. But as you can see, there's only one real option that was 100% with 0 preference points. There's a couple reasons for that. One of the main reasons you can draw region X with 0 preference points is it's a low deer population unit. There's not a lot of deer on the public land there. This is a very dry unit, and although there are deer on the public, they're much more sparse here than they would be in other units. Another reason it's so easy to draw is it's a relatively new region. What I mean by that is once upon a time there was no region X. It was just lumped in with region F. So region F used to span this entire section here, and there was no region X. So it's easy to draw because a lot of people forget about it, and a lot of people haven't necessarily done their research on it yet because it's a relatively new area, but they just wanted to expand the opportunity that sort of way. So another thing I'm going to do with this graphic here is just to give you a general idea of why some of these regions are more sought after than others. So I'm also going to list the non-resident quota for each region. So each of these regions has a different tag quota that's given out to non-residents in the draw. So I'm going to page over in my, I've got the hunting regs for Wyoming here, and then I'm just gonna list how many tags are available for each one. So going over to region A, they give out 4,500 general season non-resident tags. Region B, we got 1,350. I apologize for my handwriting on this. I'm just going to try and buzz through this really quickly. Region C, 2,300 tags. This is all 2018 data too, by the way, because that's when I did the hunt. It changes year to year based on the mule deer populations year to year. Where's region D? Region D, now we're getting into some lower tag numbers. Region D has a lot of public land. That's probably why it's more restricted. The reason they can give out so many tags for these regions is because there's very little public land. So they don't expect that many people to harvest because they're really the only non-residents that are going to harvest in these units are ones that have either a private land trespass permit or the ones that are going with region F. Moving over to region F, I have 750 tags. This is a pretty popular unit. It has good public land access, but the main thing, there's a big thing to remember about Wyoming, is if there is a wilderness area, a designated wilderness area, like right here by Yellowstone National Park, there's a lot of wilderness in region F. Non-residents can't hunt that without a guide. So they have pretty good tag numbers for region F, but there's also a lot of wilderness. So that's a huge thing to remember about Wyoming when you're planning your hunts. Plan around the wilderness areas. Alright, region G has 400 tags. Region G, as you can see, it takes 8 points to draw, so that's your 9th year of applying. But region G is the most sought after of the general units in Wyoming. Reason for that is they have the Teton Range here, has really great high country public land, and there's not a lot of wilderness in it. So it's high country like region F, but you can access more of it as a non-resident because it's not wilderness. Region H is going to be 600 tags. And this is kind of in between the scenario you have with G with a lot of public land, high country, and region F where it's public land, high country, but wilderness restricting it. They have wilderness around here, but it's not as much as region F, which is why it's harder to draw. It takes 4 points more. than region F. So that's region H. J, we've got 900. Region K, we have 500. I actually really like region K as well because they have a lot of BLM land, very open terrain that's good for glassing. Their populations are lower because they don't have as much of the high country summer range stuff, but they have good public land access, and yeah, this is actually in the red desert area of Wyoming. And if you know anything about the migrations in Wyoming, that's where they kind of they migrate a lot of the time off of the Teton Range and the Wind River Range here into the red desert. So these region W and region K are good winter range units. Region M, we get 800 tags. Region R, we get 600. Region T, we get 400. Region W, we get 900. And Region X, this is the one we're going to look at, we get 300. Reason for that is population is very low, and there's a lot of accessible public land within that unit. So this already low population can get pretty hard. And then Region Y is 1800. Okay, and that's just about going to cover it. I don't have, for whatever reason, I don't have in the atlas here the tag quota for region Q or region L. It's possible that it just didn't exist in 2018. The map that I created is from 2020, but I'm looking in their 2018 atlas, so for whatever reason, there's kind of a disparity between region L and region Q. Maybe there were no general season region Q options back in 2018. Same with region L. But this is the gist of what it's going to look like. These, like I said, these can change over the years. Region X didn't used to exist. The quotas change every year. It sometimes takes more points to draw. But this is a generalization of what it's going to look like and why I ended up choosing this region X. Another big thing to note in Wyoming is, this is another thing that gets very confusing, is they have different license types. So they have the general season stuff, which is good for all the units within that region that are general season. And then it'll list in their what do they call it? Their hunting, just hunting regulations. In their hunting regulations, what the season dates for that general season are. But then where it gets a little bit confusing is they have different license types. They have type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then a type 0. Each of those means a different thing. Usually the limited entry ones that you'd be looking at are type 1. That's any antlered. And then sometimes they have a type 2 that also says any antlered, but usually what they do with the type 2 is they have an interesting caveat that limits that type 2 license to be within half mile of irrigated land. So that kind of seems like it's functioning as their depredation permit, because the irrigated land is usually the farm fields in Wyoming, so that type 2 tag is focusing on areas around the farm fields. Usually. That's what it usually looks like you see. And then when you move on into type 3, it looks like that's more of targeting the white-tailed deer, if it's a deer tag, and then type 4, 5, 6, and kind of so on. Once you get into those higher numbers, that's usually the doe tags, and that's usually the cow tags for elk. So that's the higher number stuff here. Usually what you're looking at is general season or type 1. Type 1 being most of the limited quota tags. I'm going to page over and I'm going to get an example of what I mean here just from their atlas. So I'm going to go to unit 127. This is the unit I hunted on the general season tag. So 127, general season, October 15th through October 24th, antlered deer. But they have two other 127 type tags. They have a 127 type 3 tag, November 1st through the 30th. It's a limited quota, and that's any white-tailed deer. Then they have 127 type 8 tag, October 15th through November 30th, limited quota, doe or fawn white-tailed deer, valid east of US Highway 20. So they have those two different ones. Like I said, the Type 3 is targeting whitetails and the Type 8 is targeting does. And then you have the regular buck general season tag. So that's an example of how Wyoming does that. There's no way to really memorize it or be able to really quickly look at it. You kind of have to flip back and forth in their little atlas between what license type is this, and then what are the limitations on the tag. So you really do have to read everything that they've got for their different units. Okay. So the point system in Wyoming is pretty straightforward. Like I said, this is how many points it takes to be 100% certain that you're going to draw these regions. But another thing that they do is they do have a portion set aside for a random draw. So if you're applying for, let's say, the big one, we'll say Region G, takes 8 points to be 100% certain in their preference point draw, but I think it's 20% of their tags, so whatever 20% of 400 tags is, are going to get a set aside for a random draw. So, I think, what is that, 80 tags? We'll say it's 80 tags just for the sake of simplicity. We'll say 20% of 400 is 80. So 80 of these 400 tags are going to be set aside for a random draw. No points are factored into that whatsoever. So 80 tags are just going to be given to random people that apply for Region G. So there is a random draw component to Wyoming. It's not just 8 preference points must be acquired to draw for Region G. There's a slight chance that you could pick up one of those 80 tags out of the 400 that are available in the random draw. So that's something to factor into the equation when you're applying in Wyoming as well. So from here, you can see the only region I was 100% certain that I could draw on, and I wanted to be 100% certain, was Region X. So I'm going to, for this next portion that we're going to go into, is I'm going to zoom in specifically on Region X, and then I'm going to talk about a lot of the nuances with Region X. Alright, so this is our zoomed in map of Region X. So what I've got here is I've got different pictures, snapshots of the terrain that I hunted. The Region X is going to be here. So this is all the different units. Like I was saying, they do numbered units within a bigger region. It borders Region F, like I said. It was once part of Region F, but it splintered off. And then the other regions on the east side here. And what I also kind of tried to illustrate is the topography. So you get a bigger mountain range coming down here, and then foothills coming down here. This range is, I think that's the Absaroka. And then this one here is the Bighorn Range. So you got the main Bighorn Range here on the east side of R&M. And then you get foothills coming down through R&M here. But this unit is lower elevation, that's why it's so dry. And it gets a lot of the wind shadow effect east of Yellowstone, keeping a lot of rain and moisture out of this unit. That's why this area is so dry. But these are the deer that we harvested in this unit. The other individual that I didn't end up hunting with but had the tag harvested this deer in area 122. And I ended up harvesting this super small deer in area 127. So all these pictures that I took, these are all 127. 127 actually has the better habitat for deer. But because that's they get a lot of the higher elevation stuff coming off of the foothills. And because they have that higher elevation coming off the foothills, they have more moisture in 127 because of that. So the thing they do with this area, because 127 has the highest deer population, is they change the season dates. So 127 season, like I said, it's actually October. So 127 is an October season. Whereas this whole area up here, these are November seasons. Because there's very few deer there. And they want to be able to maximize the harvest. So they figured since there's so few deer there, they're sparse on public land, let's give them the first week and a half of November. So this season runs November 1st through the 10th for the general season up here because there's very few deer. Since there's more deer here, this runs October 15th through the 24th. Alright, and as you can see, these are the general season areas within Region X, but I've got these other two things that I drew in red. So what that means is these are our limited entry areas. So 165 and 125 aren't areas that you can hunt with the general season Region X tag. 125 actually takes a lot of points to draw. I think it's somewhere around the range of 7 to 8 points to draw for 125. And it has a different quota than the 300 tags that they give out for Region X. So let me look at my atlas here. 125 in 2018 for their Type 1 antlered deer license, they gave out 100 tags. So this has 100 different tags from Region X. And that season, it was actually a pretty cool season. They ran it in November as well, from November 1st through the 15th. So that's what they did for 125. Let's go over to 165 and see what they did for 165. 165, their Type 1 limited quota 80 deer. They gave out 125 tags, but they ran that season from October 15th through the 31st. What that immediately suggests to me, since this was a November tag, and this one was an October tag, what that suggests to me is there's more deer all of the time in that unit. And when there's more deer, they want you to hunt the season where they're less vulnerable. Whereas this season, this 125 here, there's less deer. It already is really hard to hunt there because it's a sparser population. They gave you a really good season date in November. So that's why they did that. There's less deer here. It's harder to hunt, but let's give them a good season date. There's more deer here. It's easier to hunt there. Let's give them a little bit harder of a season date. That's why they kind of did that. Same thing they did here. Less deer here. Harder to hunt. Let's give them a good November season date. More deer here. Easier to hunt. Let's give them an October, slightly harder season date. Now, thing about this unit is I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone unless they need to be able to hunt different seasons for work planning stuff. What I mean by that is if you need a tag that works for October and November, has really long season dates, I would do this. But otherwise, I wouldn't recommend hunting this because there's very few deer in the public land here. The trophy quality isn't that high. Even the larger deer that we harvested, this one over here is only a 110-inch deer. So if a lot of people are in this same situation trying to plan their first mule deer hunt, I wouldn't recommend going to Region X in Wyoming. It was just our specific example. So hopefully that keeps people from spamming it with their tag applications. If I had 0 points, I honestly wouldn't apply in Wyoming. I would save up until I get 2 to 3 points, and then I would do their other regions. I don't think Region X is necessarily worth it. If I didn't have any points anywhere, I would rather do a hunt in Idaho. So that's just kind of the caveat that comes with it. And that's why I don't mind giving up so much information about this area, is I just want to get the concepts out there. I don't necessarily think people would be well off applying for Wyoming as their first non-resident mule deer hunt. I think you would get more bang for your buck in Idaho or finding one of the tags in Colorado that didn't sell out, or even Southeast Washington. I think all three of those would be better options than hunting Region X in Wyoming. Reason for that is the entire time I was out here, I think I saw about 12 deer, and it took me 3 days to find where this small cluster of deer was on the public land. And even then, I saw 5 of these four-corned bucks. I never saw anything like this. That was only in 122. So where I was hunting in 127, I never saw anything bigger than this. And then I did see about 5 does. And they were very sparse on the land here. I think you'd be better off as a first-time hunter hunting a different area. But this is just to kind of get the information out there, kind of explain why I made the choices I did. I looked at the season dates. I figured out which ones would work for me. I looked at the draw structure in Wyoming, looked and saw how many points it would take, figured out which parts of it were general season, like the parts up here, general season here, which would work on my tag, which units in here are limited entry and are a completely separate draw. And then from there I figured out what parts I could hunt, where I wanted to hunt, and that sort of thing. So I narrowed it down kind of slowly based on what points I had, what seasons I had to hunt, how we had to plan the hunt around both my schedule and another individual's schedule. So that's why I went through this and made the decisions I made. I'm going to do a part 2 to this where I explain my actual scouting stuff. So I'm going to do a part 2 where I zoom in even further on 127 and 122 and explain what I looked at when I was scouting, and then I'm going to give more details on my process as I went through the hunt. But there's definitely going to be a part 2 to this, and I'm hoping to do another 25-ish minute video that's explaining more of once I knew I was hunting Region X, how did I approach the actual scouting. So this one was focused more on drawing the tag, whereas part 2 is going to focus more on the scouting and the actual hunt. Thank you guys for being here.